All right, deadlifts. Everybody knows they're super effective. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the 4 styles of deadlift that everybody should be having in their workout. Deadlifts. You know, we've done a couple episodes like this, and people really enjoy us communicating like the different variations of kind of these foundational human movements. So it's natural we're going to get to deadlift. This is one of the most basic foundational types of human movement that you should train. You should have at least one of the exercises we're going to talk about today, but definitely all of them at some point belong in your routine.
Still a lot of fear around it, I would say,
yes.
too. Even like promoted from physicians and people that have any kind of aches and pains, like they're just going to avoid it entirely. Which I would love to get in front of them and tell them the benefits. And there's ways to really build that back up, build that strength back up and support system. But it's such a valuable exercise to just discard it completely.
I feel like it's gotten so much better. And I mean,
way more now.
Even so much that it garners an episode like this, because this isn't just an episode about why you should deadlift. It's the 4 different variations that everyone should do. And I think that's a good sign that we've arrived to here, right? That most people, especially if you listen to a podcast like this, are aware of the benefits of deadlifting and know that, hey, this is important that I learn to do this movement. The next level to that, in my opinion, is understanding the differences. And I think that most people, and this goes for the squat and the squat variations, deadlift, many other exercises. That we tend to like incorporate, one of those variations and go, oh, I'm cool, I do that. But if they understood the value, the individual value and benefits of all the variations and why they're so valuable, then you might be more likely to incorporate those into your routine more often. I think that's the desired outcome of this episode.
Totally. And when we say foundational human movement, what we're referring to is a type of movement that is important, especially to not lose. So here's how the human body works when it comes to movement. If you don't repeat a movement regularly enough, or if you don't practice a movement regularly enough, if you don't strengthen a movement regularly enough, you will actually eventually lose the ability to do that movement. The human body only maintains and keeps what it thinks it needs, and it discards what it thinks it doesn't need when it comes to movement. And this is just, the argument is made that this is an evolutionary factor in the sense that in order to conserve energy, why would my body maintain ability to do things that I never do, right? It doesn't do that. So if you don't deadlift, if you don't practice deadlifting over time, you will actually start to slowly lose the ability to do so, to the point where when I would get clients in their 50s or 60s and they hired me, and these weren't totally deconditioned people, but they weren't exercising, they were just your average person, getting them to do just a simple hip hinge, it was like not processing in their brain. I would have to like put my hands on their hip and their back and really do all these different cues just to get them to figure out how to hip hinge, because it's like their body forgot how to do it because they never practiced it. They never did it. Yeah. Strengthening foundational movements like deadlifts and all the different variations has a ton of carryover to other types of movement in the body. So it's a huge also bang for your buck. It's a small investment in terms of
big systemic effect.
Yeah, the results you get from it are huge. Like deadlifts and their variations are some of the best exercises for function, for muscle gain. They're excellent for muscle gain, and of course for fat loss. So you don't want to avoid any kind of hip hinging deadlift type of movement. And again, we're going to make the argument today that you should practice at least the 4 that we're going to talk about today. Now, the muscles involved in deadlifting and its different variations, really, we like to refer to them as what's called the posterior chain. Posterior, it's the back of the body. Chain, because they're all connected through this movement, okay? So although all the muscle in the back of the body technically could be connected to the posterior chain, mainly we're talking about the hamstrings, the glutes, all the muscles of the back, erector spinae, the lats, the rhomboids, the trapezius. Those really are the main kind of muscles that you're going to be using in these, especially the glutes and especially the hamstring.
Well, this is one of those movements that from the traps all the way down to your soleus is getting worked.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've made this argument before. A long time ago, we did an episode where we argued and debated, the true king of all exercises. And there's a case to be made that the deadlift is the king of all exercises. So, I mean, I can make a case for the squat or the deadlift because of how valuable the deadlift is. And specifically to our clientele that we would train, right? What you would get with most people that you would train or that would hire us was they neglected the posterior chain. They did a lot of things, and that's just because most everything that we do is in front of us. And so very few jobs or sports require a lot of the posterior chain. A lot of it's anteriorly driven. And so you have this overdevelopment of all the muscles in the front, this underdevelopment in the muscles in the back. And that causes this kind of rounding shrimp-like posture, which tended to be one of the number one things that we were always combating as trainers, was always working on forward head and rounded shoulders.
You can only do so many mobility moves to try and like get you back to a proper upright posture. And like, you really need to strengthen these muscles to keep the balance in check. And, there's really not a lot of options for the posterior chain that's going to be effective like the deadlift is effective.
Yeah. And if you neglect, strengthening and training the posterior chain, especially as a chain, meaning working together, okay, not just isolating these specific muscles, but rather having them work in unison. What happens over time, yes, your body forgets how to do that movement, right? Use it or lose it. That's what that refers to. But you also, and this is the big one, you start to slowly and then over time quickly increase your risk of low back pain in particular. This is typically where it shows up, right? So if you have a weakness in your hamstrings, your glutes, erector spinae, right? Your rhomboids. And also especially if you have an imbalance between them working together, the weak part of the chain, right? The weak link tends to be the lumbar spine. It tends to be the lower back. So this is one of the main reasons why low back injuries are so common. It's the most common form of pain and injury. And by the way, most people's low back pain today are not the result of some major injury, like a car accident or I fell. No. It's like some minor
chronic pain.
And then it's just this lingering kind of chronic issue. And the reason, again, is that, the human body, there's an optimal way to move, and then there are less optimal ways to move. And the further away you move from optimal, the more likely you are to feel pain. And again, if you look at the spine has got a lot of joints in it, right? So you got all those discs in the spine, and the spine anchors at the pelvis. Then the pelvis attaches to the bones of the legs, right? The femur and so on. And then all the muscles that work together. Well, if they're not working well together, if I get that pelvis and I tilt it down to the right, or I tilt it forward or back excessively, or I cause the heels to come up off the floor, because you even mentioned, Adam, the soleus. That's part of the calf muscles, right? Or the muscles that support the spine are too weak, so then the spine can kind of flop and move in different directions. You're going to potentially, and oftentimes you will, experience a back pain and back problems. So one of the best ways to bulletproof your back, literally, is to get really good at different kinds of deadlifts. Like if you get really good at the different kinds of deadlifts that we're going to talk about today, and you train the rest of the body appropriately, like your back is going to be pretty damn good. It's gonna be hard to hurt it. In fact, I remember because you mentioned this, Adam. Like today, you see a lot more people deadlifting, which is true. When I was training in the late '90s and then even the early 2000s, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody deadlifting ever, unless you went to a powerlifting gym. You just didn't see it. Nobody deadlifted. In fact, when I deadlifted as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old general manager, I would actually have members stop me and come up to me and say, "You're gonna hurt your back," because they've never seen that exercise before. So you do see it much more commonly today, which is a very, very good thing. So it's a great exercise to perform and get strong at. And again, the carryover. And then from a muscle building standpoint, if you are motivated for working out because you want to look better, the way that the back of your body looks, especially your hips, says a lot to other people. Athletes and coaches know this. Like you could tell if an athlete's fast or strong oftentimes.
Them hips don't lie.
Yeah, you look at their hips, you look at their back, their mid-back in particular. This shows strength, it shows stability. For a woman, obviously, this is something that is considered attractive. It's healthy to have a strong posterior chain, and because it's healthy, it looks really good. So in terms of aesthetics, these are some of the best exercises you can do.
100%. So this used to be, you've heard us talk about this on the pod. If you've listened to the podcast for some time, you've heard us talk about like one of the moves that we used to do with clients, like when you take them on an assessment, and a lot of times the clients needed to lose weight and they felt a certain way about themselves, right? And I would put them in better spinal alignment. Like I would actually move their shoulders, and I'd have them look at themselves, their reflection, the way they were standing, their posture, just comfortably when they were talking to me. And then I would go over and I'd put them on this like posture check where I'd make them get into more of a neutral spine, where their chest is upright, their shoulders are pulled back. And then I'd have them look at themselves in the mirror, like look at a difference. You look like you just lost 10 or 15 pounds. Like look how much better your physique looks just by holding it upright. Mm-hmm. And so you'd be surprised how many people aesthetically look so much better just holding their posture upright. Forget that they need to lose 15 or 20 pounds of body fat on them just by standing upright. That's how valuable that is from an aesthetic perspective. Is like, man, when you could have the most banging body in the world, but if your posture sucks, your body looks that way. And so it just by standing upright, and this exercise supports that more than arguably any other exercise that I could teach a client would be the deadlift. The deadlift hits all of those muscles in the back, and since almost everybody is anteriorly dominant, that ends up helping posture for everybody.
Totally. Today's giveaway on YouTube is Maps Split. To enter to win, leave a comment below this video in the first 24 hours that we drop it. Subscribe to this channel and also turn on notifications. If you win, we'll let you know in the comments section. Now, this episode is brought to you by sponsor Seed. Hands down, the world's best probiotic. There is no probiotic on the market that's like Seed. They have the science, they have the advanced technology with the capsule that releases the bacteria where it needs to be released, and the bacteria are guaranteed to be alive. If you want the benefits of probiotics, the reduced inflammation, better digestion, better skin, even a better mindset. Yes, it's true. Studies have shown it helps with anxiety in some people. Go with Seed. That's seed.com/mindpump. Use the code 25mindpump. Get 25% off your first month's order of Seed's Daily Symbiotic. Also, we have a sale this month. Maps 15, half off. The Shredded Summer Bundle of programs, half off. And the Bikini Bundle of programs, also half off. If you're interested, click on the link at the top of the description below. All right, here comes the show. All right, so let's start with the first type of deadlift, known as the conventional deadlift. And it's called conventional because it's, I guess, the most commonly done or expressed form of a deadlift. Now, with the conventional deadlift, the shins are inside the hands. That's your grip on the barbell is probably about shoulder width or a little bit wider. You are squatting down to some extent to grab the bar, although it's more of a hip hinge. And let's talk about that for a second. If you were to stand up tall and bend over, there's a couple ways you could bend over. One of them is by rounding the lower back, right? Or by flexing the lumbar spine. The other way is to bend at the hips, right? To flex at the hips. Flexing at the hips is known as hip hinging. So what you want when you do this deadlift, when you do especially a conventional deadlift, is you don't want to bend over to pick up the bar by flexing the lumbar spine. You want to bend over to pick up the bar by bending the knees, so squatting somewhat lower, and then also, and more importantly, hinging at the hips, maintaining neutral spine when you do this. This is what makes the deadlift safe. This is why when people look at it who don't know what a deadlift is, like, oh my God, you're going to hurt back. Yeah. You won't hurt your back if you maintain a nice, neutral, strong, tight spine. And if it's the hips that are hinging, if you're bending at the hips, then you're okay.
Well, this is really what, creates it gets pretty technical in terms of, it looks pretty simple to apply. But when you actually go into it, there's all those factors where you're a bit squatted, but you're also hip hinging, and hip hinging is something you have to learn. It's not a natural inclination. Like you said earlier, the natural inclination is to reach forward and to kind of curl forward and
Round the back.
and round your back, or it's to squat all the way down and kind of stay super upright. So this is somewhere in between the two of those, and then to be able to create that tension. So now all of a sudden, you know, I'm lighting up, I'm engaging all my muscles correctly, so that way I'm stabilized, supported. So a lot of that impact doesn't go to those places, the weak points you mentioned, like lower back and things like that. When you pick it up and really driving through your legs, the legs are pretty much the most important part of that lift.
Another reason why this is so extremely important to learn how to hinge at the hips is that this is what's going to protect you for the rest of your life. So you're most likely not going to get away with moving into your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and never have to pick up a grandkid, never have to pick up a bag of dog food, not have to move a bag off the ground, pull a weed. And if you don't learn how to load the hips and to hinge, and all you do is round at the back to pick over, like eventually you're going to get hurt. Eventually you're going to throw your low back out. And that's unfortunate that that's what is also what scares people from doing that movement. But that's even more reason why you learn to do it. What you need to do is just regress all the way down to a really light weight that isn't going to risk any sort of injury and learn how to hinge versus rounding at the low back, because that is a skill that you need in the real world. It's a skill that you need to learn how to do so you don't hurt yourself doing little mundane things around the house. And it's almost always, by the way, how a client has gotten hurt with that I've trained with. I've talked about this before, where they've either rotated to the left or right and out of there doing something really easy, or they didn't hinge at the hips to pick something up and they rounded their low back and they threw it out doing something stupid, picking up dog food or a little baby or something that should have not thrown the client's back out, but because they don't hinge at the hips properly, they do that. So important to learn this skill.
Yes. Now, when you grab the bar, arms need to stay totally straight when you're doing a deadlift. So the arms and hands are really just there to hold on to the weight. The prime movers are the hips, the knees, to some extent the ankles, but you're keeping the arms totally straight. You want to lock the shoulders down and back, maintain that good position. Justin mentioned something that's really important. Rather than trying to lift the bar off the floor, think that you're driving your feet through the floor. It's a nice cue that'll create a nice deadlift. Now, with the deadlift and with all of the ones we're going to talk about, you can definitely do continual reps, but with some of these, it's better to pause at the floor, reset your form, and then start again. Conventional deadlifts is one of those.
Yes.
I think it's far superior.
Highly recommend that.
Doesn't take anything away from the exercise. If anything, I think it adds. But when you do one rep and you put it down, let it sit on the floor, get in proper position, get real tight, then do the lift again. What you don't typically want to do, not that this is necessarily wrong, but there isn't a ton of benefit to just touching and coming up each time.
I don't think it's wrong, but it's the true definition of what the exercise was designed for. It's a dead lift.
Right.
It's designed to teach you how to take something from a complete dead position and lift it up. Yeah, no momentum, no bounce, no rhythm, completely dead position, which is what you would have to do if you walked up and helped your buddy move a couch in the house or lift something up that was in a dead position. And so learning how to lift something from that position, I think, is important. It doesn't mean that we can't build muscle in the glutes and the hamstrings doing it with a touch and go and other things. But like when you're talking about learning the skill of the deadlift and all of the benefits that come with it, at one point in your lifting career, you need to learn to lift it from a dead position.
Well,
not
it
just
keeps the intention on the bracing mechanisms and really like keeping that tension consistent in terms of protection. So you could get into that sort of touch and go rhythm, and what tends to happen, just like when you're squatting sometimes as well, you start to kind of relax a bit in terms of the bracing, and then that's leaves you susceptible for injury.
Totally. Now, the sumo deadlift, which is the second one, very similar to the conventional, except your arms are in between your legs. So your legs go out wide, feet pointed out slightly, and there's different variations. Some people could do a really wide sumo. Other people more of a kind of a moderately wide sumo. But really the key here is that your legs are wider than they were when you're doing a conventional. And instead of your hands being on the outside of your shins, they're on the insides of your legs. Now, biomechanically speaking, on paper, the sumo deadlift is, and it should be biomechanically advantageous. Now, this doesn't always turn out correct in the real world. In other words, on paper, I should be able to sumo deadlift more weight than I can conventional. That's just not true. I can conventional deadlift more than I can sumo. In the sport of powerlifting, both are interchangeable, meaning if you do a deadlift in the competition, you could pick sumo or conventional. I will say this though, they're not the same exercise. They work a lot of the same muscles, but it feels very different. A sumo deadlift, you get down much lower. There's less hip hinging involved, less stress on the erector spinae muscles of the back, more hip emphasis is what I tend to find. But they're both, I think you need to do them both.
Now, what for you highlights it as a must do? I can think of some reasons from an aesthetic purpose why it's like, so sumo deadlifting was one of my favorite go-to exercises for like glute development. Just because the glute med is neglected and
you got to keep your knees apart.
And in order to perform the sumo deadlift really well, you have to keep your knees open, right? And you'll feel yourself wanting to allow the knees to collapse inward. And so the glute med has to activate and fire to keep those knees pushed out. Plus, it is more of a squatted position than it is a stiff-legged deadlift type of position. So it has a little bit more glute involved in there. So for that reason, it used to be one of my go-to movements, especially for my female clients that wanted to develop the glutes. So for me, it has always been in the rotation, especially for clients that are asking things like that. Are there other reasons why you would say, okay, this has to be in our rotation of deadlifts, other than just varying it up from the conventional?
Yeah, for me in particular, in the real world, when you're having to lift something off the ground, you're going to be in either position, conventional or sumo. And just because you're trained one doesn't mean the other one feels very natural. In fact, I went for a long time. When I first started deadlift, this is my own personal experience. When I first started deadlifting, I learned how to do it sumo. That's how I was taught. I very quickly switched to conventional, fell in love with it, didn't do sumo for years and years and years until I hit a sticking point, wanted to hit a PR, and I thought, okay, let me try these other variations. My first 2 months of sumo deadlifting, was rough. Like I couldn't get near the weight I could do conventional when I should be able to get at least close because I never trained it. And that's when I realized, like, okay, just because I'm strong at one,
two different skills.
And I noticed when I did them both, I was less prone to injury. I felt more balanced. Everything just felt better. It's a different position. It's a different position.
And it seems to fill some of those gaps, right, from conventional in terms of that stance and like which muscles to secondarily kind of help stabilize. And so I think they're both valuable and interchangeable in that aspect. Just like when we were talking about the squats and the front squat versus the back squat, like two completely different exercises, but they definitely fill the gaps of like each other's needs.
Yeah. Now, taller people tend to do better at the conventional. Shorter people tend to do better at the sumo, but that's not always the case. Our friend Lane Norton, he's my height, long limbs, like me. He likes to pull sumo. It's just the way he likes to pull. I like to pull conventional. But like I said, both, you got to train them. I think both. By the way, of all of these, as we go through them, because people are going to ask, this doesn't mean you have to give equal time to every one of these variations. You can like one or two and do that more than the others.
Prioritize it. Yeah.
Just don't not do the others, right? Just do the others to the point where you're not going to get into a position like I just explained where I never do them. And then I go try to do it. Oh my God, it's so awkward and strange for me because I haven't done this for, a year or two.
Right.
Next up is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated,
I'm glad you said
underperformed, yet valuable variations of deadlift, which is a single leg deadlift.
Yeah.
Tremendously beneficial exercise. You're still hip hinging. The weight is going to be much lighter because you're only on one leg. But man, you want to talk about stability and balance in the hips. You want to talk about QL, strength and stability because you're balancing on one leg. The stability of the pelvis to not twist and torque while you're doing this exercise. Like all of that, all the counter rotation and counter, kind of stabilization.
It's so revealing how immediately you want to rotate or like externally rotate. And to go through that with like a really slow tempo and be very controlled with the mechanics you're applying, that translates so well once you have both feet on the ground. And now we have those mechanics that are nice and stabilized and perfected.
So there's so many muscles in the hip complex. And when we talk about people that have low back injuries, and we have talk about people that have weakness going on, it's always like weakness, right? When we talk about mobility issues, and it's always there's a weakness in an area. And I found with clients that the hip complex was probably one of the number one places where we had some sort of dysfunction. That dysfunction was related to some sort of hip strength and stability in that area. And the single leg deadlift, it starts off as a single leg toe touch for most clients that eventually progresses to a single leg deadlift. That movement was a staple. I trained everybody in.
Oh, all my clients did it.
It was and I've said before,
it was one of the best low back protecting exercises.
And I've said in this podcast before, I've brought it up where I've given an example that there's a move that I've always told my clients, especially my advanced age, and that I would teach them how to do this step up from the side, right? So they step up to a balance, to a single leg toe touch, come down, which is basically what that is, right? So the ability to step up, the ability to stabilize, the ability to hinge at the hips and balance in a deadlift position and come back. I would tell my clients after I taught that movement, like, if there's anything that you get from me and that you maintain for the rest of your life, don't lose this skill, because having that skill to be able to do that will eliminate a lot of issues that I think I've seen in most clients if you can just do that. And so I'm glad you started this rant on the single leg deadlift as seriously one of the most underrated exercises. I don't see enough of this. No. I don't see enough of it in programs. I don't see enough of it with people training in the gym. And I know why. It sucks. It's
hard.
Lame.
It's hard.
Yeah. It took me a really long time to get to a point where I could like grab like 100-pound dumbbells and do this.
Like
I had to work.
Yeah, because your balance is all over the place.
Really, really difficult. But let me tell you, and you can go far enough back. I went on a kick when we were doing this podcast where I would do that when I was going on the mobility kick, where that's where I stopped doing a lot of bilateral stuff, where I jumped from my knees, I balanced on one foot barefoot, and then I would deadlift dumbbells up, and I was progressing that. That's some of the best I have ever felt. Strength-wise, mobility-wise, no chronic pain in the low back and hips area. Like, that movement is so valuable. In fact, I would argue that if you got really good and strong at the single leg deadlift, that of all the ones you could only do just for that for the rest of your life, that one.
You're not going to develop an imbalance.
You're not.
No. It's also really good for ankle and strength and foot strength. You do this barefoot. So that's why I do them, right? I do them because I watch my foot and prevent it from collapsing in as I'm doing this movement. So my foot has to stay in a good position to do this. And the carryover, by the way, so people watching who are like, I'm into just aesthetics or strength, like, single leg. I'll tell you what, if you're hitting a plateau with your deadlift, go do 3-4 weeks of getting good at a single leg deadlift. Go back to your traditional deadlift. Watch what happens.
That's how I broke the plateau in my deadlift. Yeah. I was stuck at like 500 and I couldn't get through that. And then I went and got to a place, and I think I had to start. I want to say I was like 30-pound dumbbells was the heaviest I could do with the single leg, the barefoot, like I was doing, and worked my way all the way up to doing 100-pound dumbbells from that position. And boy, I came back to that. And not only did I feel stronger, but I felt so much more grounded and stable. I felt planted. I felt way better doing that movement in addition to being stronger. And so, yeah, I would make the case if we were playing this game, which is what I think is the most important, I would say of all the deadlift variations, this to me is the most important one for sure.
Next up is the Romanian deadlift. Now, this is called Romanian because Romanian weightlifters in the Olympics, this was an exercise that they did that became popular because they did pretty well in their sport. Now, Romanian deadlift is a pure hip hinging exercise. Your knees are bent, but they stay fixed. Yeah. And then you bend at the hips, sticking your butt out. And this is the best hamstring development exercise you could do, period, hands down. Like, from an aesthetic standpoint, you get good at this exercise, you're going to develop nice hamstrings and nice glutes. It's also a great glute exercise. You can also get really strong at the Romanian deadlift. This is a staple in a lower body workout. I mean, I have yet to write workouts for people for lower body and not include a Romanian deadlift for the hamstrings. I'm much more likely to put this in than a leg curl, for example.
Well, I imagine both of you guys were similar to me too, that this is most likely where you started a lot of clients, right? Teaching somebody conventional deadlift
instead of all the way from
is really tough to do for a lot of clients. I mean, obviously, if I could get to a conventional deadlift right out the gates, of course I would.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I had to start with a Romanian deadlift just to teach what hip hinging is. Right. And it was a safer, more functional way for me to get them to understand that movement and how to keep the spine rigid before I could then incorporate the kind of bending at the knee and picking the bar off the movement and staying stiff and tight at the same time. So most of my training when I first started with a client would start with a Romanian deadlift for them to get that skill set down. And then I would have to progress them to say like a conventional deadlift and then eventually like
I
single
would
leg.
start with the like a waiter's bow Romanian deadlift. You know, hands behind the back, elbows back, type, just teaching the hip hinging.
That's good. Or one of those PVC pipes
Yep.
on your back, just to make sure you keep that nice engagement there in your core to keep a flat back. So
Yes.
yeah, all that stuff is super important going into when you get back to convention.
Yeah, and as you get more advanced, like I said, this could be a great aesthetic and strength exercise. I mean, you can get the weight up here pretty high as you get better and really develop like just really nice, strong, shaped glutes and hamstrings from this one exercise. Look, if you love this episode, we have a guide. It's How to Squat Like a Pro. It's literally a guide that teaches you how to squat better mobility, better types of ways to warm up, types of squats. It's a free guide. You can find it at mindpumpfree.com. You can also find all of us on social media. Justin is on Instagram at mindpumpjustin. I'm on Instagram at mindpumpdestefano, and Adam is on Instagram at mindpumpadam.